A man in a plain white shirt sat alone on the bench outside the boardroom of the company he founded. Nobody recognized him. Nobody offered him water. Nobody asked his name. Inside that room, executives were closing a multi-billion-dollar deal that would erase everything he had bled for. 6 minutes passed. The clock above the receptionist kept ticking. No one called him in. What none of them knew was that one signature, one clause buried in the original charter could undo all of it. So the question was simple. Would he stand up or walk away forever? The house outside Boston was quiet most mornings. Daniel Carr liked it that way. He kept the curtains half drawn, the coffee strong, and the phone face down on the kitchen counter, where he could pretend it didn't exist. For almost 3 years, that small, ordinary silence had been the closest thing to peace he had known since Elise died. He had been a different man once, younger, hungrier, the kind of founder who slept on office floors and drew product diagrams on napkins. He and Martin Hale had built Meridian Care from nothing more than a shared belief that the American medical system was failing the people it claimed to serve. 2 engineers on mission, one promise scribbled into the company charter on the day they incorporated. Healthcare technology that worked for the patient first. Profit second. Always. Elise had believed in that promise more than anyone. She had been the one who pushed Daniel to keep going when the early investors laughed them out of the room. She had been the one who edited his pitch decks at 2 in the morning and reminded him why the work mattered. And then on a Tuesday in late October, she had walked into a hospital with a routine complaint and walked out on a gurney because her chart had been merged with another patient's by a broken record system. The kind of system Meridian Care had been built to fix. After her funeral, Daniel had stopped sleeping. He had stopped eating in any way that resembled eating. He had stayed at the company for another full year, throwing himself into the engineering side, refusing to look anyone in the eye. Then Martin's heart gave out. At 51, slumped over a conference table in the middle of a routine board call, and something inside Daniel finally cracked. He had walked away. He had handed the operational keys to Vivian Cross, the sharpest executive Martin had ever hired, and he had moved north and tried to remember how to be a person again. The board still had his signature. The charter still had his name. But the building, the meetings, the press releases, all of that belonged to Vivian now, and that was the way Daniel wanted it. The email arrived on a Thursday morning just after 7. It came from an address he did not recognize, routed through what looked like 3 separate forwarding services. There was no greeting. There was no signature. There was only a subject line that read, "Before you read about this in the news," and an attachment that ran almost 40 pages. Daniel read the first page twice. Then he set the laptop down on the kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time before reading the rest. The document was a draft acquisition agreement. Meridian Care was being sold to Halverson Pharmaceutical, a Texas-based conglomerate that had spent the last decade settling lawsuits over price fixing and falsified clinical data. The number on the cover sheet was $4.2 billion. By any normal valuation Daniel could run in his head, the company was worth at least 7, probably closer to 9. Someone was leaving billions on the table on purpose. Someone wanted this deal to close fast and quiet. He kept reading. Buried in an appendix, he found a side letter, the kind of document that should never exist in a clean transaction. Halverson would deposit $80 million into a private holding entity within 90 days of closing. The signatories on the receiving end were 3 names Daniel knew very well. Vivian Cross. Gregory Hammond, the chief financial officer Martin had hired the year before he died, and a board member named Charles Whitfield, who had voted against every single one of Meridian Care's patient protection policies for the last 4 years. Daniel read the side letter 3 more times to make sure he was not imagining it. He was not. They were selling the company to the worst possible buyer at a discount, and they were being paid privately to do it. Everything he and Martin had bled for, every clause they had written into the charter to keep the mission protected, was about to be quietly stripped out, and handed to the kind of company that had killed Elise's chart in the first place. He spent the rest of the day not moving very much. He made a sandwich he did not eat. He stood in front of the window and watched a car pass, and then another one. He thought about Martin, about the night they had stayed up arguing over a single line in the founding charter, the line Martin had insisted on keeping in, even when the lawyer said it was unnecessary. The Founders Clause, a piece of legal architecture that gave Daniel, as the original majority holder, a narrow but absolute right to override any acquisition that violated the company's stated mission. Martin had called it the kill switch. Daniel had not thought about it in years. By evening, he had moved to his home office and was running quiet checks. He still had access to certain internal systems that no one had bothered to revoke, partly because Vivian had not believed he would ever come back, and partly because IT had simply forgotten he existed. What he found in the next 4 hours did not surprise him, which somehow made it worse. The board minutes from the last 6 months had been sanitized. 3 senior engineers who had raised compliance concerns had been quietly pushed out, replaced by Halverson-friendly hires. The patient data architecture had been restructured in a way that made bulk extraction not just possible, but easy. None of this was illegal yet. All of it was the prep work for something that would be. He pulled up an old photograph on his desktop, him and Martin standing in front of their first office in Brooklyn, both of them wearing the kind of cheap suits that did not fit. They were laughing at something. He could not remember what. Daniel closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a private attorney in Manhattan, a man named Peter Voss, who had drafted the original charter, and who answered on the second ring, even though it was barely 6 in the morning. Daniel asked one question. Voss answered it carefully, the way lawyers do when they understand exactly what is being set in motion. The Founders Clause is still active, Voss said. It has never been amended. If you walk into that boardroom and invoke it before the acquisition vote closes, you have full authority to halt the transaction and remove any executive who participated in violating the mission charter. But Daniel, listen to me. The window is narrow. Once the vote is recorded and the deal is signed, that clause becomes a lawsuit, not a switch. You'll spend the next 4 years in court while Halverson finishes carving the company up. How long do I have? 5 business days. The board vote is scheduled for next Wednesday. Daniel thanked him and hung up. The second call was harder. It was to a woman named Karen, who had been helping with the household for almost 2 years. Now a quiet, steady presence who had become something like family. He told her he needed to be away for a few days, possibly longer. He did not explain why. She did not ask. She had known him long enough to recognize the particular flatness in his voice that meant something serious had happened. He walked through the house once before he left, past the photograph of Elise on the hallway wall, the one where she was laughing at something off camera, past the small framed drawing in the kitchen, the one with the lopsided red heart, and the words, "For everyone," written underneath in marker. The drawing had been a gift from Elise years ago after one of their late-night arguments about what Meridian Care was supposed to be. She had handed it to him and said, "Don't forget who this is for." He had not forgotten. That was the problem. Vivian had. Daniel packed a single bag. He locked the front door behind him and got into the car and pointed it south toward New York. He did not turn the radio on. He drove for almost 4 hours in complete silence, and somewhere around the Connecticut border, he understood, with a clarity he had not felt in 3 years, that he was no longer running away from anything. He was going back. The Meridian Care headquarters occupied the top 11 floors of a glass tower on Park Avenue. Daniel had not set foot in the building in almost 3 years. He arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9:15, dressed in a plain white shirt and dark trousers, carrying nothing but a worn leather folder under one arm. He looked by design like nobody in particular. The lobby had been redesigned since he last saw it. The original mission statement, the one Martin had insisted be carved into the stone wall behind reception, was gone. In its place was a brushed steel logo and a rotating digital display showing quarterly growth charts. Daniel stood there for a full minute, reading the empty wall before he walked to the security desk. The young woman behind the counter looked up with practiced politeness. He told her he was there to see Vivian Cross. She asked if he had an appointment. He said no. She asked his name. He gave it. She typed it into her terminal, frowned at the screen, and typed it again. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have you in our system." "Are you a vendor? I'm the founder of this company." The young woman's smile did not change, but her eyes did. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly to someone for about 30 seconds. Then she hung up and told him with the same trained politeness that Ms. Cross was unavailable and that the best she could do was take a message. Daniel asked if he could wait. She told him the lobby was for visitors with confirmed appointments only. He could see in her face that she did not believe a word he had said about being the founder. He thanked her and walked to a small bench near the elevator bank and sat down anyway. 2 security guards drifted closer within 90 seconds. They did not approach him. They simply stood near the elevators and watched him. Daniel watched them back. He had spent enough years building this company to recognize the particular kind of nervous attention given to a man who might be about to cause a problem. He pulled out his phone and sent one short text to Peter Voss. Then he settled in. For almost 2 hours, nobody spoke to him. Executives walked past in suits, worth more than his car, none of them looking at his face. A delivery courier asked him for directions to the mailroom. He gave them. A junior analyst sat down on the same bench, took one glance at his clothes, and moved to a different bench. The receptionist changed shifts at 11. The new receptionist did not even ask his name. At 11:34, an elevator opened, and a woman in a charcoal blazer stepped out, scanning the lobby, with the impatient efficiency of someone who had been told there was a situation. Her eyes passed over him once and kept moving before snapping back. She walked over slowly. He stood up. "You're not on the visitor list," she said. Her name tag read, "Patricia Executive Operations." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm here to see Vivian Cross. My name is Daniel Carr." Patricia's expression did not change, but her hand twitched toward her phone. "Mr. Carr, if you have a matter to raise with Miss Cross, please send it through legal counsel. She is in back-to-back meetings preparing for a board session and is not available for unscheduled visits. The board session is tomorrow." "That's correct." "That's why I'm here today." Patricia studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw made her step back slightly. She told him to wait, walked 20 feet away, and made a phone call he could not hear. When she came back, her face was carefully neutral. "Ms. Cross will see you at 4 o'clock this afternoon in the small conference room on the 38th floor. I'm afraid she cannot accommodate anything earlier." Daniel said that would be fine. Patricia walked back to the elevators without looking at him again. He spent the next 4 hours in a coffee shop 2 blocks away, working through the founder's clause documentation that Voss had couriered to his hotel the night before. By 3:45, he was back in the lobby. This time, the receptionist nodded at him without comment. The 38th floor had been the engineering floor once. It was something else now. Glass walls, white surfaces, abstract art that looked like it had been bought by the square foot. The small conference room sat at the end of a long corridor. Patricia let him in and closed the door behind him. There was no water on the table. There was no apology for the wait. Vivian Cross arrived 8 minutes late. She walked in already speaking to someone on her phone, finished the call without looking at him, set the phone down, screen up on the table, and finally raised her eyes. "Daniel, you look tired." She had not changed much in 3 years. The same precise dark hair, the same expensive minimalism in everything she wore, the same way of looking at a person as though she were calculating their net present value. "Vivian, Patricia tells me you came in without an appointment. That's not really how things work here anymore." "I noticed." She gave him a thin smile. "I'm glad you stopped by. We've been meaning to schedule something for months. There are a few items I'd love to walk you through. Quarterly performance, the new product roadmap, some board developments. We could put something on the calendar for next month somewhere quieter than the office." Daniel set his folder on the table. I'm here about Halverson." The smile did not vanish. It simply froze in place for about half a second before resuming slightly tighter than before. "I'm sorry. Halverson Pharmaceutical, $4.2 billion. The board vote tomorrow. The $80 million wired through a side letter to a holding entity that you, Gregory, and Charles all happen to be signatories on." She did not move. She did not blink for a long moment. "I don't know where you got that information, Daniel, but you're working from something inaccurate. There is no side letter. The Halverson conversation is preliminary, and it's exactly the kind of strategic discussion the board is supposed to be having on behalf of the company. I have the document. I have the side letter. I have the wire instructions. Then someone forged them and sent them to you. That's the line you want to use." Her jaw tightened. The careful executive politeness slid off her face in pieces. What was left underneath was something Daniel had seen in boardrooms 100 times before, just never aimed at him. It was the look of a person who had decided years ago that the company belonged to her and that anyone who disagreed was an obstacle to be moved. "Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you've earned that much. You walked away. You handed me the keys, and you walked away 3 years ago, and I have spent every day since then keeping this company alive. You have no idea what it took. The market shifted. The regulatory environment became hostile. Our biggest hospital contracts were renegotiated against us. I have made the hard, ugly, practical decisions that this company needed in order to survive decisions that you, frankly, were never willing to make. So if you're here to lecture me about mission and purpose, save it. The mission is meaningless if there is no company left to carry it. Halverson killed my wife, Vivian." The room went very still. Their data system, their cost-cutting on hospital integration, the merged records architecture they sold to 400 hospitals. That's the system that misread Elise's chart. That's the company you are about to hand our patient database to. She looked away for the first time. When she looked back, her face was composed again. "That's an emotional argument, Daniel. It's not a business argument. And with respect, you cannot run a $4 billion enterprise on grief. I built this enterprise on grief. Martin and I both did. That's the whole point of it." She picked up her phone. She did not dial. She just held it in her hand, the way people hold things they want to remind themselves they still control. "You should go home. Whatever you think you have, you don't. The board is unified. The vote is tomorrow. By Thursday morning, the deal will be public, and there will be no version of this conversation that matters anymore." Daniel stood up. He picked up his folder. He walked to the door, opened it, and turned back. "The board meeting is at 10. "Yes. I'll see you there." He closed the door behind him. He did not sleep much that night. He sat at the desk in his hotel room and read through the Founder's Clause one more time, line by line, the way Martin had taught him to read every contract. He drafted a 1-page invocation document. He signed it. He sent a scanned copy to Peter Voss at 4 in the morning. Voss replied within 15 minutes, confirming that everything was in order and that he would be present at the meeting in his capacity as outside counsel. The board met in the main conference room on the 42nd floor. 12 people around a long oval table. 3 windows of New York behind them. Vivian at the head. Gregory Hammond, 2 seats to her right. Charles Whitfield across from him. The Halverson representatives, 4 of them in nearly identical suits, sat along the side wall as observers. Daniel walked in at 9:58 without being announced. The room went quiet in stages, starting with the people closest to the door and moving outward like a wave. Vivian's expression went through 3 different shapes in under 2 seconds before settling on cold composure. "Daniel, this is a closed session." "Not for me." He set the folder on the table. He remained standing. "My name is Daniel Carr. I am the founder of Meridian Care and the holder of the original Founders Class equity defined in Section 14 of the company charter. Under Section 14, subsection C, I am invoking the Founders Clause to halt the proposed acquisition by Halverson Pharmaceutical effective immediately on the grounds that the transaction materially violates the company's stated mission. Vivian was on her feet. This meeting is not open to former executives. Daniel, I am asking you to leave. Patricia, call security. Section 14 also grants me the authority in the event of a mission-violating transaction to remove any officer or director who knowingly participated. I have documentation of a side letter committing $80 million from Halverson to a private holding entity payable to 3 signatories on this board: Vivian Cross, Gregory Hammond, Charles Whitfield. A sound went around the room. Not loud, just the small, sharp intake of breath from people who suddenly understood what kind of meeting they were in. Charles Whitfield's face had gone the color of paper. Gregory was looking down at the table. Vivian was still standing, her hand braced against the table edge. That document is fabricated. Peter Voss is in the lobby with originals. Halverson's general counsel has already been notified by my office that the transaction is now subject to a Founders Clause invocation, and that any further movement on the deal exposes their company to securities fraud liability. One of the Halverson representatives stood up without saying a word and walked out of the room. The other 3 followed him within 30 seconds. Vivian watched them leave. When she turned back to Daniel, her voice had dropped to almost nothing. You don't understand what you've just done. I understand exactly what I've just done. Effective immediately, you are removed as Chief Executive Officer. Gregory, you are removed as Chief Financial Officer. Charles, you are removed from the board. Security is downstairs. They will escort you to your offices to collect personal items. 2 uniformed officers were already at the door. Voss had walked them up. Vivian looked at them, looked at Daniel, opened her mouth to say something, and closed it again. She picked up her phone and her purse, and she walked out without speaking. Gregory followed her. Charles needed help standing up. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Daniel was about to address them when his own phone began to vibrate against the table. He glanced at the screen. It was Rachel Pierce, head of platform engineering. She had never called him before in her life. He answered. What she told him in the next 90 seconds drained the color out of his face. Somewhere in the building, while the boardroom drama had been unfolding, an automated extraction process had been triggered against the patient database. Real time. Active. Massive. Someone had set a kill trigger to start pulling records the moment the Halverson deal was killed, and it was running right now. 11.4 million patient records. And the bleed had already started. Daniel told Voss to take the room. He took the elevator down 4 floors to the engineering level, without waiting for the doors to fully close on the way in. The platform engineering floor looked nothing like the executive floors above it. Cheaper carpet, older monitors, the kind of fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly ill. Rachel Pierce was standing at the end of a long bank of workstations, 3 of her engineers clustered around a single screen, all of them speaking at once in low, urgent voices. She turned when she saw him coming. She was younger than he had expected, maybe early 30s, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had not been sleeping well for a long time. She did not waste time on greetings. It started 13 minutes ago. The script was sitting dormant in the data orchestration layer. It activated the second the Halverson deal status flipped to terminated. Whoever wrote it wanted insurance. If the sale got killed, the records walk anyway. Where are they going? 3 offshore relay servers we don't control. From there, we have no idea. Right now, we're seeing roughly 40,000 records leaving per minute. We've already lost about 500,000. Daniel looked at the screen. Lines of data scrolling faster than he could read them. Real names. Real diagnoses. Real people who had trusted Meridian Care with the worst moments of their lives. Why haven't you cut the connection? Rachel's mouth tightened. Because the extraction script is hooked into the live patient services backbone. The same backbone that runs medication scheduling, surgical prep timing, and ICU monitoring across 472 hospitals nationwide. If I pull the plug on the data pipe, I pull the plug on all of it. Every hospital running our system goes dark at the same time. We're talking active surgeries, ventilators, infusion pumps tied to our scheduling layer. For how long? Best case 18 minutes for the failover systems to spin up at the hospital end. Worst case longer. And 18 minutes is enough time to kill people. He could feel the floor under him very precisely. He could feel his own pulse in his neck. Somewhere on the other end of those data streams, 11.4 million strangers were being silently undressed. And somewhere in 472 hospitals, people were lying on tables, with their lives running through the same wires. He thought about Elise. He thought about a hospital chart misread by a system nobody had bothered to fix in time. He thought about the small framed drawing in his kitchen, for everyone. How many of those 472 hospitals have local failover? All of them are supposed to. In practice, our compliance audit last year said about 94% are actually configured correctly. The other 6% are the problem. 28 hospitals, roughly. Get me a list, right now. One of the junior engineers was already typing. The list came up on a side monitor inside 40 seconds. Daniel scanned it. He picked up the desk phone and called Patricia upstairs. He told her to hand the conference bridge off to Margaret Holloway, the senior compliance director on the 40th floor, and have Margaret put him through to the chief medical officer of every hospital on the list. All 28 of them. Now. He gave the list to Patricia line by line. He hung up. He turned back to Rachel. Once the bridge is live and we have confirmation from all 28, you cut the data pipe. Total shutdown. Every system, every hospital. We will not let those records walk out of this building. Rachel held his gaze. You're going to take down a national hospital network on purpose. I am going to take it down for 18 minutes after every single one of them has confirmed they are on manual. That is not the same thing. And if one of them doesn't confirm in time, then we hold the cut until they do, and we accept that more records leak. But we do not pull the plug on a hospital that isn't ready. She nodded once and turned back to her team. The next 9 minutes were the longest of his life. The conference bridge filled up one voice at a time, each chief medical officer announcing their hospital and their readiness status. Some of them were calm. Some of them were furious. One of them was crying. By the 7th minute, 26 of the 28 had confirmed manual fallback. By the 8th, 27. The last one, a regional hospital outside Cleveland, took an extra 90 seconds because their backup paging system had not been tested in 14 months. While they waited, the counter on Rachel's main screen kept climbing. 600,000 records. 700,000. 840,000. The Cleveland hospital came through at 9 minutes and 40 seconds. All 28 confirmed, Margaret Holloway's voice said over the speaker. You have national clearance to execute system shutdown. Daniel turned to Rachel. Cut it. She typed a single command. She hit return. Every monitor on the engineering floor flickered. Half of them went black. The data counter on the main screen froze at 893,000 records. Across the country, in 472 hospitals, automated systems handed off control to human hands and paper backups, and the institutional memory of nurses who had been doing this job long before Meridian Care ever existed. The room was very quiet. Rachel exhaled slowly. We held it. 893,000 records out. Bad, but not 11 million. How long until we can bring the system back up safely? Once forensics confirms the extraction script is fully neutralized and there are no other dormant payloads, my team is on it. 12 hours, maybe 16. He nodded. He looked at her for a moment longer. You sent the email. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was lower. I'd been trying to flag this internally for 6 months. Nobody listened. I knew if I went to the press, the deal would close before any of it mattered. So I sent it to the only person who still had legal authority to stop it. Why didn't you sign your name? Because if I was wrong, I'd lose my career. And if I was right, I needed you to come back for the right reason, not to defend me. He extended a hand. She shook it. By that evening, Voss had finalized the official termination of the Halverson agreement. The board, what was left of it, voted unanimously to reverse every governance change made in the last 18 months. The mission protection language was reinstated in the charter this time with stronger teeth. The compliance team was rebuilt from the ground up. 3 Halverson-friendly directors resigned within 48 hours. The Department of Justice opened a formal inquiry into the side letter payments by the end of the week. Daniel did not take the chief executive seat. The board offered it to him twice. He declined both times. He took the chair of a newly created Office of Mission Integrity, instead a position with the authority to veto any decision that violated the founding charter and the obligation to publish an annual report explaining every decision he had blocked. He named Rachel Pierce as the company's new chief technology officer the same week. He recommended a candidate for chief executive, whom Martin had once tried to hire years ago, a woman named Margaret Ellsworth, who had spent the last decade running a non-profit hospital network in the Midwest. The 893,000 affected patients were notified individually within 14 days. Meridian Care paid for credit monitoring, identity protection, and a class action settlement fund out of its own reserves before any lawsuit was filed. The 18-minute hospital outage caused exactly 0 patient deaths, though there were 3 close calls that became case studies in failover training for years afterward. Vivian Cross was indicted in early spring. Gregory Hammond accepted a plea deal. Charles Whitfield's name was quietly removed from 2 other corporate boards within a month. On the Friday after the deal collapsed, Daniel stood alone in the lobby of the Park Avenue Tower for the last time before driving home. The brushed steel logo and the digital growth charts were gone. The original mission statement had been recarved into the stone wall behind reception, the same words Martin had written almost 20 years earlier. Healthcare technology that worked for the patient first. Profit second. Always. He read it once. He thought about Martin. He thought about Elise. He thought about a promise made in a small kitchen in Brooklyn a long time ago, and a lopsided red heart drawn in marker on a piece of printer paper, and the words underneath it. For everyone. He drove north out of the city that afternoon. The traffic on the highway was bad, the way it always was on Fridays, but he did not mind. He had what he had come for. He had kept what he had promised her he would keep. And when he turned into the long, quiet road that led back to the house outside Boston, he found that for the first time in 3 years, the silence waiting for him, there did not feel like hiding. It felt like home.